Welcome back to Focus on Frisco. Thanks for staying with us. Again, I'm Shannon Fallon. We've really got a really interesting show as usual. But today we're going to start out talking about short-term rentals. It's kind of been the big thing that we've been talking about because of the growth of the county through visitors and beyond. And things are changing pretty quickly. So I got Chad Most on. I know, it's so awesome. I usually only get you at budget time. But very happy to have you here today because you're kind of taking the reins on this, whether you want to or not.
Well, it's been a longer process than a lot of folks probably realize.
Right.
Town Council did pass a new ordinance as of January 8th, 2019. But the process has really been going on for over 2 years. Our housing task force had a specific section, a policy group working on the short-term rental impact on the housing issues in the community. And we've had numerous public stakeholder meetings,
right.
Public open houses, etc. We brought in other communities who are dealing with some similar issues to kind of inform us as to what has worked best for them, etc. So it's been a really long process, about 2 years of gathering public feedback, community surveys, etc.
Right, which is so interesting because I don't think, and I'm glad you pointed out, because I don't think people realize that it has been going on for that long. I mean, everybody in the county, you guys, have been proactive in thinking about this because it started to creep up, and it's just one of those things that now all of a sudden it seems like that's all we're talking about is short-term rentals. But it really has been a process. And the other thing I find fascinating is that it's not just these small communities like ours, but you hear about it in Denver, that they're talking about short-term rentals and things like that. So to start, can you give us an idea, what do you mean by short-term rentals? What is this new buzzword?
A short-term rental generally is defined as any unit that's available for rent for 30 days or less, consecutively to the same client.
Okay.
So a long-term rental, which doesn't fall under the short-term rental guidelines here, and is not a taxable transaction, etc. Those are rentals or leases of 30 days or more.
Okay.
So that's the cutoff is 30 days.
Okay. So if you're at 31 days, somebody's coming in for 31 days, this is no longer a short-term rental.
Correct.
This kind of goes into that lease thing.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's, in particular with the taxation involved, the lodging taxes and the sales taxes, what you don't want to do is tax those folks who are renting on a long-term basis, for a year-long lease, etc. So.
Because especially for the town of Frisco and some of these other towns, that kind of moves into that, whether it's employee housing or that kind of stuff that is on a whole different page.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's also important to note that short-term rentals are not a new thing, in particular for Summit County.
Right.
One of the first projects I worked on when I started at the town of Frisco in 2005 was short-term rental compliance.
Oh my gosh.
But that was before the big boom of Airbnb and other platforms like that. VRBO, HomeAway, they were just coming on board when I was starting. But things have changed and moved very quickly over the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years. So
you bet they have. So one of the things before we start to talk that I wanted to point out was the short-term rentals, going back to that, is whether you're renting a room in your house for 2 nights or 29 days, or whether you're renting your whole house.
Correct.
Or one of your properties. I guess they start to call that umbrellas if you've got more than one rental property. But it doesn't matter whether it's one or the entire house. This
Correct.
is still in there. Okay, so what are the goals of this new ordinance that the council passed?
When we entered the public process, after doing a year or two of research in addition to the other decade of experience that we've had in handling the short-term rental kind of umbrella, as he said, we really developed 4 goals as the town to go into this process with. Number 1, we needed to ensure compliance and a level playing field for all of the owners of STRs.
Right.
With the advent of Airbnb, et cetera, and some of the changes in these online booking platforms, it had become much more difficult to contact owners directly about their properties. Again, when I started in 2005, most of the online advertisements had direct contact information for the owners.
Yeah, that's so true.
if they were in Frisco, I could call those owners or email those owners directly and say, hey, we haven't done a good job of educating folks as to what the responsibilities are. So let me help educate you as to, where we need to go. But
fill out this paperwork, please.
but the online booking platforms have now done their best to kind of be the mediator in these situations. So ensuring compliance is one of the biggest goals that we've had just to start with.
Right.
That also gives us a baseline of data to go off of and direct contact information to deal with any issues and to educate ourselves better as an organization as to what issues are out there. So
Can
that
I pause
was the
you on
number
that?
one goal. Sure.
With compliance, do they get a hold of you? Like how, when somebody registers for something on Airbnb, does the town get something that says, hey, you've got somebody new in town that's renting out their space?
Before, no.
Okay.
Those online platforms would not communicate directly with us, and
Okay.
particularly because they're not located in our jurisdiction, and in many cases,
Right.
not in the state.
Yeah.
But we, as part of this ordinance and part of this compliance process that we're embarking on now, we are contracting with a third-party firm who are experts in combing these websites and attaching every bit of available data for these different advertisements and
Super
linking
spies.
them directly to the physical addresses of the properties so that we can then reach out directly to the owners.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So that we can educate them from there.
Right.
Yeah, so-
That's great.
Absolutely. So number one goal was ensure compliance.
Okay.
And the way that we're meeting that goal currently is that we have, you mentioned umbrella licensing before,
Right.
for owners of multiple properties or property management companies
Right.
that represent multiple units within the town. We used to allow them to hold one license. And what we learned is that doesn't give us a way to properly track who is in compliance and who is not in compliance.
Okay.
Some of the companies would provide us with a list of the addresses that they represented.
Okay.
Some would not, and for valid, privacy concerns. So we
Right.
understood that. But part of the new ordinance is now requiring each unit to hold a specific license, so that we can identify once the third-party tracking firm has given us the list of all the properties advertised for rent. We can track now which one of those has a license, which one of those doesn't, so we can focus our efforts on compliance on those that are not in compliance, rather than a scattershot approach.
Got it.
So that's one of
Okay.
the big results of the ordinance.
Okay.
The second goal was really to reduce some of the negative impacts we've been hearing about in communities.
And what have those been?
The big three are parking, trash, and noise.
Yeah.
And we do have other ordinances in our town code that deal with some of those issues. So this short-term rental ordinance is more of a complement to those. Okay. And I think and in my experience, 95% of the short-term rentals, or roughly that percentage, are already following most of the guidelines that have passed in the ordinance.
Right.
But unfortunately, our job in local government sometimes is to regulate for some of the bad apples that are out
Right.
there. So we hope we're taking a pretty measured approach. We understand that this ordinance may not solve every issue that's out there.
Yeah.
But we wanted to give ourselves a good baseline to start. And then the last goal that we had, I'm going out of order here,
No, that's all right.
is to really analyze the new data and get a better understanding of all the issues that are out there and impacting our residents and our guests, so that we can better handle these issues moving forward. So
Yeah.
I think this is a good baseline. It's a measured approach to start, and then we can really start collecting the data and communicating with folks in a more direct fashion, so that if we need to make adjustments in the future, we have the ability to do so. But the third goal of the four was really to ensure some level of guest safety. We had heard some stories.
That's interesting. Because you don't hear it from that aspect necessarily.
Well, and we had heard, there are some very real issues where folks would come into town, rent a unit. Maybe they have some information stored on their phone or in their GPS system in their car.
Right.
But they don't know the physical address of where they're staying. So even if they can contact emergency medical services for an emergency response, in some cases they did not know where to direct
Oh, that's fascinating.
the response. So,
Right.
Part of our goals here were to make sure that certain information was
Right.
communicated to the guests to protect them in those situations. So.
That is interesting. As I read through some of the things that are going to be now required, and we'll go over those here in just a few minutes.
Sure.
But as I was reading over some of the things that were required, it was kind of enlightening. You go, oh, right, because not all places have phones. And so you're not necessarily making the phone calls from that, but we'll go into that. So that is very interesting. Let's talk. We'll take a break here in just a minute, but let's talk a little bit about the process of getting into the system of the town of Frisco. Even if somebody has never rented their home or their room before, and they're like, hey, we're going on vacation for a week, why don't we put it on Airbnb? Do they still need to get a license?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So it is, no matter what, you need to get that license. And what's the process in doing so?
Well, what I would first recommend, most of the updates that we're going to be sharing moving forward as far as the new process that's going to be put into place will be at www.friscoshorttermrentalsingular.com. So www.friscoshorttermrental.com is a great resource. We're going to put all of the information there.
Awesome.
There's a good rundown of the current requirements and the new ordinance that was passed up right now.
Okay.
However, I will be updating that website or that web page tomorrow or by tomorrow with an updated timeline as to when folks need to register and when licenses, the new short-term rental licenses will begin to be issued by the town.
Okay. So I think a lot of people may have read over the weekend, there was an article about Summit County short-term rental policies. We want to make sure that everybody knows that you either register with the county if you're outside of town lines, or for everybody within town limits, you register with the town of Frisco.
And I've gotten quite a bit of questions about that over the past couple of weeks as well.
Okay.
So yes, these are not redundant regulations. If you are located within the town of Frisco municipal limits, then the Frisco short-term rental ordinance will be applying to your short-term rental. If you are outside of Frisco municipal limits, then the county regulations will apply.
Got it.
So that's a very important distinction. If you have any questions about exactly where your property, hopefully you know if you're within the town or not. But if you don't, and there's a lot of weird islands that are surrounded by the town of Frisco that are unincorporated, you can either give me a call or check with the Summit County assessor just to verify which regulations will really apply to you.
That's perfect. And I want to point out that if you're in the town of Frisco, you don't also have to register through the county website.
Correct.
The town of Frisco is going to take care of all of it. All right, so let's do this, Chad. Let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, let's talk about we'll talk about fees, registration, and then some of the requirements that people do have to have in their unit, just as you mentioned, for some of those life-saving efforts.
Sounds good. I'll be here.
All right. Hey, thanks for staying with us. Stay tuned, because we are going to talk about those things when we come back. So you're watching Focus on Frisco.